Please be advised that this podcast contains language and themes that may be sensitive to some listeners. Listener discretion is advised. Today on the Life at Sage podcast, we're talking to a true British hero, former Lieutenant Colonel of the British Army, Mark Hendry, whose leadership in humanitarian efforts in Nepal in 2015 earned him the MBE title from Queen Elizabeth II. Now Global Performance Intelligence Director at Sage in Newcastle, UK, Mark transitioned out of the Army and into a career at Sage via the Pathways program, a readiness for work initiative that gives people a managed entry or re-entry into the corporate world after time out for whatever reason. I have to say that for such a highly decorated commander of people, Mark is one of the most self-effacing leaders I've ever come across, and my conversation with him was nothing short of humbling. We get into everything from the reasons he decided to transition out of the Army, the anxieties he faced in doing so, and what the rewards have been in his post-military life in a global technology company. Let's jump right in. Hi, Mark. So we're here to talk about how companies like Sage can help people coming out of military careers to readjust and find new rewarding career paths via the Pathways program. But before we get into that, I'd like to start by asking you about your own role as Global Performance Intelligence Director at Sage, if I may.
Yeah, so I suppose I work in the transformation office, and I suppose the realm I work in is very much data and analytics. And I suppose I am sort of focused in particular on sort of colleague experience, colleague data, how we can use or enhance colleague data to better effect for the business, creating a better experience for our employees, absolutely, and also maximizing our employees and colleagues and their productivity for business outputs as well.
Now, we're here to talk about how Sage supports veterans to switch to life in the corporate sector. And you're here because you've had quite the enriching military career, haven't you?
Yeah, I've been sort of very lucky. I served over 23 years in the British Army as an officer, and I left almost a year ago exactly yesterday. And I left the armed forces, and sort of the next day or the next Monday, I started at Sage as part of their Pathways program. And as you've articulated, the Pathways program really is about sort of how to help people from different walks of life, or perhaps they've had a career change or a career break. How does Sage enable them to start a new career, learn new skills, and thrive in a new environment?
It sounds like a pretty big leap from the life and death experiences you go through in the armed forces to the corporate world. Is that true?
Yeah, huge. And I think particularly after sort of a couple of decades as well. I mean, I won't lie, I think you become institutionalized. You speak in a certain way, you use certain languages, certain acronyms, and sort of going from an institution like the British Army into being catapulted into the corporate sector is a huge change. Yeah, absolutely. And I'll be honest, I didn't really. I don't think I was internally as ready as I could have been. I think potentially for that change, and I have found it really challenging. But I would say that from a positive, I couldn't have had any more support than what I've had from my individual team, but also sort of I'm very lucky in the role I'm in. I work across the business and I work with lots of different teams, organizations, and everyone's super supportive and understanding that sort of my background's a little bit different and I think differently and I sort of act differently to a point, and being very welcoming with that. And I think for me, it's a testament to how Sage welcomes diversity and sort of a diversity of thought and the power that can bring.
When you say it's been challenging, can you go into that in a little more detail? I mean, what's the biggest challenge for you in making the change?
I think a lot of it is about knowing who to speak to. As an example, I think in a sort of centuries-old organisation like the British Army, I think it's sort of trained. The structures are very fixed and it's very hierarchical. Whereas I think within an organisation like Sage, sometimes it takes a bit of time to work out who the decision maker is, who the team is that you need to talk to in order to get to an outcome. But then also understanding, you go into a lot of meetings like a Teams call like this, and it's working out what what position each party is coming from, and understanding sort of where their part of the business resides and how they can influence the outcome as well. And that's taken me. It's essentially learning a new language. Learning a new language, learning a new structure, and then learning how I can use the skills that I've got to support and to enable decisions in the business to hopefully for the better. Absolutely.
Has there been any anxiety as a result of that?
Anxiety for me? Yeah, absolutely. And I was very lucky. I had a really successful career in the British Army, and it culminated in and I was commanding officer of a very, very large regiment based down in Kent. And I thought, I'm pretty confident. I know my business. I know what I'm doing. But actually coming into this environment, I found it really nervous. It was a really a big change. And I found, day one was really quite a nervous time for me, sort of, getting to know people, getting to understand things. A bit like starting a new school. It was very much, who you're going to speak to, you're going to go for a coffee with, all that kind of stuff. And I'm really pleased to say that sort of within a couple of weeks, I sort of realised quite quickly that what a great team I work with and I sort of really closely with, but also across the business as well. And as I say, everyone could not have been any more welcoming and warm to me and the support that they've given me in this transition. But yeah, to your point, I think I was pretty anxious early on. And I think keen to have an impact, keen to deliver, keen to sort of make sure I'm adding value. And that's a massive part of my DNA from my background is I want to make sure that I'm delivering and I'm adding value at every time. And I think that was a concern just to make sure I could add some value in a very, very different industry and in a different sort of, and a really specialized part of the business as well within data.
Can I ask what made you decide to make the switch?
I think I was very lucky in the Army. I suppose I did a lot of operational tours overseas, spent a lot of time overseas doing various different things. And I reached a point within my service where spending more time away from my family, I've got a young family, and sort of potentially putting myself in harm's way, and what that sort of entailed, sort of led me to start looking at different options and different avenues in the outside world, and also looking for new challenges as well. And I think one thing I've always loved is, and I'm a massive believer, is in the growth mindset and sort of how can you learn, being curious about new things, and sort of when I was looking at Sage and sort of understanding what the business did, it was really fascinating and interesting. And then so the more I got to speak to people within the Sage environment, just got me hooked, and I wanted to know more, and I wanted to know more, and then gradually just one thing led to another. So it's been a really sort of, for me, I suppose it's about learning new things and growing. Yeah.
How did you find out about the Pathways program?
So I have a couple of friends that already worked in Sage, and I suppose I'm originally from the northeast of England, although I spent a long time away now for the last couple of decades. But I'm originally from here, so I came back here, and I did a bit of research on sort of successful companies within the northeast of England and sort of what they did and what they were about. And I had some friends that work within Sage, and they sort of pointed me towards, given my background, pointed me towards the Pathways system, and sort of did a bit of research on that, understood it, and spoke to one of the sort of the specialists within the Pathways world who explained a little bit more about it. And she couldn't have been any more helpful to sort of help me sort of shape my CV from military language into civilian commercial language, to get me speaking to the right people, the right introductions, just to find out a little bit more about what the company does, their culture, all that kind of stuff. It's really held my hand throughout that process, which was, it couldn't have been any better for someone like me. It was great.
So just explain to me a little bit more about what the Pathways program is and how it works and how long it takes to get through it, that sort of thing.
So, I mean, from my perspective, Pathways, it's about sort of people that are, making potentially a big life change, maybe. But like myself, transitioning from one sort of sector to another. It could be returning to work after a long length of time, perhaps maternity or paternity leave, or perhaps it's a long time out of work. And what sort of Pathways does is it sort of helps people in my position to, I suppose, to understand what the industry is, help them translate the skills that they've got but also sort of exposes the opportunities that are available within Sage that they could potentially apply for. And as they go through it, it then sort of helps them through the application process. And I think one of the best parts of Pathways for me has been the support after I got the role. So continuously, I still speak to my sort of Pathways sort of representative, and she's incredibly supportive, and we speak fairly regularly. It's always, how are you doing? How's things? Anything we can do to help? How can we sort of make this experience better for you? And how comfortable are you feeling? So that's been incredibly supportive throughout. So it's about essentially helping people change their styles and change their story effectively. And it's been a really positive experience from my perspective.
You talk about the re-entry into civilian life as an intensely dramatic shift. Apart from some of the examples you just gave us, like the language on your resume, for instance, what are some of the other major differences you've had to contend with?
Yeah, I think from a role perspective in particular, I suppose in my last role, I was the decision maker within a very large organization, and then within Sage, I'm not necessarily a decision maker in every meeting that I'm in, and sort of understanding how to leverage different people, support discussions, and enable has definitely been a learning journey. Absolutely, I think team dynamics. So, and what I do love about Sage is that everyone has a view, and it's what everyone is listened to. And often there's been occasions within my military background where actually it has to be to some extent a hierarchical decision process that goes on. But Sage is a much flatter and I suppose more dynamic organization from a decision perspective. I'd say clearly the army structures are very fixed, or they tend to not change a great deal. Whereas one of the things I've sort of seen within Sage, that there's a lot of like sort of organizational changes and evolutions, keeping dynamic, keeping up with sort of the external environment, and making sure they remain current. And that for me has been quite interesting to watch and be part of. But yeah, I mean, I think it's such a starkly different environment, even from what to wear for work. I mean, that for me, I'm used to sort of getting out of bed and putting one thing on and knowing what it is, and sort of getting out of bed in the morning. I'm thinking, well, I need to put what shoes shall I wear today? It's not a discussion I've ever had to have with myself at all. So I think almost every strata has been very, very different, but interesting and sort of great fun to try and be part of. And I think as a soldier, you look at the civilian world and you observe it. So actually being part of it now and sort of and understanding the challenges of it has been a real sort of exciting journey. Yeah.
That's such an interesting perspective, that you felt like an observer. I had zero idea that was the soldier's eye view. Did you know when you left that your skills would be so transferable?
I think, I suppose if I was a specialist in anything, I'd say my superpower was leadership, I suppose, because that's the way I've been throughout my entire career as an Army officer. That's what I've been sort of shaped and trained to do. So I felt pretty comfortable sort of leading things, and being part of that. And a lot of people, when you go through that transition process, a lot of people tell you how transferable your skills are. People say you'll easily get a job. But I confess, like I said earlier, there's a lot of anxiety about it. You think, I've got bills to pay, I've got the commitments, these kind of things. Hopefully I'll get something, and you hope that your skills are transferable. But I think again that's where Pathways was great, because it helped me sort of shape my experience into commercial language, which then made it receptive for, I suppose, the hiring team to look at me and say, look at me in a slightly different light. But yeah, I think from a leadership perspective, I felt comfortable. But I think more just understanding systems, language, processes, outcomes. That was for me. It was again quite an anxious time, sort of going through that and sort of thinking, well, will I be able to make this transition? Will I be able to do it? And I think it's hard for every veteran, and in fact anyone that's making a big change in their lives, not just veterans. I think it's a natural, when you're faced with change is difficult and it's challenging, and I think how you face that, how you attack it, I suppose in my old language, is really difficult to do, and doing it methodically and carefully. And I spoke to a lot of people, and I did a lot of research on Sage. I spoke to a lot of people that work in Sage, and all the feedback I was getting was positive. And I think doing research, looking at it, and taking your time about it, not making any rush decisions was key. But yeah, really difficult. It was definitely a challenge for me, but I'm very lucky. I think I've gone through that process, and here I am a year on, and I'm still really, really enjoying it.
Well, I think it's great that you got to this place. I'd like to explore the kind of source of the anxiety a little more, though, if that's possible, because there are going to be people listening to this who feel a great deal of empathy with that situation. And I think if we're going to kickstart people on the journey to overcoming it, I feel like we need to confront it head on. So, how did the reservations to transfer your skills kind of manifest themselves?
I suppose after a long time in an institution like the services, then I think you speak in a certain way, and you find that you know things automatically because of your DNA and the way that you're tuned. And I think catapulting you into a completely new and alien environment, and I confess I felt very much like an alien for the first sort of 5 or 6 months in this environment, sort of walking around, trying to understand what was going on. That's always going to be a challenging time, and I think you have to be kind to yourself and just accept that it's going to be uncomfortable. It is going to be difficult, and I think I made that peace with myself quite early on, saying, "Well, look, I know this is not going to be easy." But what I would say is I'm very lucky in the army. I sort of spent 2.5, 3 years working in Paris with the French military in their strategic headquarters. And that in some ways is similar to this experience, because I was catapulted into another environment where they speak another language, they have different systems, and it took time for me to know them and for them to know me and for us to trust each other. And that was an uncomfortable transition, but actually very fruitful at the end of it, and one I absolutely loved and enjoyed. And very similar to this one, you almost have to get through that sticky period where when you're learning a language, it takes a bit of time for it to absorb, and then suddenly you start thinking in it. And I sometimes scare myself today when I hear myself talking about data systems and various things from what I was doing a year ago. And I think if you're patient with yourself and you're kind to yourself about just saying, look, this is a normal feeling to have, then I think it just makes it a little bit easier. And throughout that process, I spoke to, I suppose, people like me, and I spoke to other people who are working in industry who had left the military and said, how does this feel? Was it like this? And I was quite reassured that everyone had gone through a similar type of experience. For me, I suppose I went from being at the very top of my game within the army to being very much on a very steep learning curve. And I think, again, just sort of being gentle with myself and not sort of being too harsh on not being able to deliver initially took a bit of time to get used to.
Being in the Army's kind of centered on putting yourself outside your comfort zone, though, right?
I think particularly as an Army officer, you move roles every 2 years. So you effectively have to reinvent yourself every couple of years. But this is sort of reinventing yourself on another level. But it does give you have got those skills sort of within you to go, right, who are the stakeholders? Who do I need to get to know? What are the processes I need to understand? What's the IT systems? You get the basics there around it. But yeah, clearly, I suppose the outcomes and the deliverables are vastly different to anything else I've dealt with. Yeah.
And now here you are. As I say, I think that's a remarkable achievement. So congratulations. And correct me if I'm wrong, you're now helping Sage to bring other veterans into the business. Is that correct?
Yes. So I think where the Pathways program need any support from a military perspective, then yeah, absolutely. I have a very good relationship, as I said earlier, with my Pathways representative, who's wonderful. And if she needs support within that, then absolutely, sort of myself. But also that there's other veterans in the business as well that I sort of know very well too, and I think that she reaches out to them as well to try and I think if we need to, we can speak to sort of veterans or people that are still serving, just to say, look, this is what it's like. This is the process. These are the pitfalls that we've gone through, and these are the highs as well, which I think is really important.
What are the stories you're hearing from other veterans in terms of their motivations for making the change?
I think when soldiers, airmen, and sailors decide to leave, they all leave for very, very different reasons. Very different reasons. And I think a lot of it can be down to personal circumstances, family, education challenges for kids. There can be a whole plethora of different reasons. And I think it's quite hard in fact, it's almost impossible to make generalizations from my experience of sort of the soldiers that I had the privilege to work with. I think that they all left and for very different reasons. And so I joined the army expecting to only do 3 years, and then sort of a couple of decades later, I sort of found myself there looking a little bit old and a little bit more tired. But I think but I think from my perspective only, it was really about sort of focusing on family and looking for a new challenge. That's what it was about. And I think I'm very lucky that I've sort of managed to achieve both with Sage.
Okay, so let's talk about some of your time in the service. I want the listeners to know just what an inspirational figure they're listening to here, because I read this one story of yours about a 2015 trip to Nepal. Actually, do you want to tell us about that?
Yeah, so I suppose over the last 23 years, I suppose I specialised in working with Gurkha soldiers, Nepalese soldiers that work for the British Army, and they have done for the last 200 years, which is enormously rewarding. And because of that, I spent a lot of time living in Nepal, in Southeast Asia, working with Gurkhas as well, obviously, and sort of I spent a lot of time working in the hills of Nepal as well, delivering community aid and various things on loan from the British Army to a non-governmental organisation that was out there. But in 2015, unfortunately, there was a real tragic earthquake of a very large scale. And I was catapulted out there to lead a task force of about 160 sort of technical experts from the UK to help deliver aid and humanitarian effort to the cause out there. And it was, whilst it was incredibly rewarding and an enormous privilege to sort of be back there to Nepal to help the people that I know and have loved for many years now, it was also a very harrowing and challenging experience, which was very, very difficult to lead and manage and be part of. But yeah, really humbling. And I think seeing people in their darkest hour and seeing things which were very, very difficult for our soldiers to see and witness, but being part of the relief effort and making things better and coordinating effort and leading the effort was something I'll always be proud of. It was a really sort of special time in my career, but a very challenging time in my career too.
You were awarded the MBE for this effort.
Yes, I was awarded an MBE for that. Yes.
Tell me about that experience.
Yeah, it's always difficult. I think it was. I mean, what I would say is that I think that award represents the efforts of 160, not just 160 people that deployed, but also people that were supporting those that deployed back home. And I think whilst I suppose I am blessed to be able to wear that medal on my chest, actually, I think what that medal does, it represents that incredible effort across a huge international effort to get people into that environment and to enable them to save lives and help people rebuild them as well. So I think it was remarkable, but the experience itself was it was something very, very special and something I'll never forget.
Wow. I can't say how much I appreciate the humility of your answer there. Do you think that's a core aspect of leadership, humility?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think and I suppose this is something I have found very transferable, is that within my background within the military, I was very lucky enough to lead technical experts. So all of my soldiers were all deep technical tradesmen, whether it be joiners, electricians, plumbers, all these different trades, which allowed them to have huge volumes of effect. And I relied upon them hugely for their expertise, their opinions, to help me make decisions in those kind of environments. And I think if you haven't got humility and you just think you're right all the time, then you will fail very, very quickly. And I also think that's cross-decks directly into this world, the world that I'm in now. And I work with the most incredible people in my team who are amongst the most talented. I mean, they're phenomenal. They blow my mind every day with some of the things they talk about and the things they can do and they can achieve. And I find that sort of humility and learning from them and their ability to sort of sit down and sort of educate me has helped me make better decisions and helped me sort of understand things better. And I think if you're not that kind of person, I mean, for me, I think it's an absolute key component of leadership. It's absolutely fundamental. And I think I've seen a lot of people fail without it, even though they're very bright, intelligent individuals. I think without humility, I think you are not essentially harnessing the power of your team and the experts that you're privileged to lead.
Other than humility, What are some of the other core skills that veterans are bringing to the corporate world from their military careers?
I think there's a lot of, I think what we are, I think from my background, I think that we deal a lot with complexity. So you're throwing into environments where there's a lot of complexity around. And I think what veterans are, what I've noted anyways, I think veterans are very good at sort of looking at complexity and then breaking it down and saying, well, okay, what must we achieve? What could we achieve? What should we achieve? Okay, let's go after the must stuff first. Right. What are the key components of this? What do I need to do that? And thinking in a methodical, deliberate way to get after a problem. And I think that's, I suppose, one aspect. I think the other thing is people skills. I think we are very human focused. And I suppose one of the things I that really makes me tick is watching people achieve all they are capable of doing, and helping them do that and enabling them to do that. And I absolutely love doing that. And I think, and again, that's not just me. I think a lot of other veterans, and not just veterans, but I think veterans are very good at that and sort of pushing people to achieve all they're capable of. And I get a huge amount of satisfaction from helping people do that. And so maybe giving them the hand on the shoulder or a gentle nudge in the right direction to try and, make them maximize their potential. And I think anything I can do for that, I think is I absolutely love doing it. And I think veterans generally are very good at that. I think the other thing is values. Values are drilled into us from the outset. And I suppose standards of, I'm not at every meeting on time, but I try and be at least a couple of minutes early for most meetings every time as a basic. How to address people, how to those things. I think they really matter, actually. I think when it comes to leadership and when it comes to interacting in a work environment, how you hold yourself with integrity, with the ability to listen to everyone in the room, and know when to be quiet, when to speak, all those different things. I think they're skills that I think veterans bring in spades. And of course, other people do, but I think it's definitely for me, it's a signature of veterans and what they offer.
I know you were recently nominated for a British Ex-Forces in Business Award as Innovator of the Year. That's quite an achievement considering that you haven't really been out of the service for that long.
And again, I suppose what I think that represents is some great work by the team that I work with, and I'm really privileged to work with, and some phenomenal individuals with their technical expertise and the way they think. And I've sort of been part of that team that's come up with some really innovative data products effectively, which are sort of looking to help colleagues, but also the business's carbon footprint as well. And I think being part of that team and sort of helping push that project in the right direction has been fabulous, and it's been a great thing to be part of. And the fact that we've sort of managed to get nominated, I suppose, for ex-British forces in business, I think is testament to them, and a tiny piece of me as well.
I guess it goes to show that it is possible to take a steep learning curve.
Yeah, I think. I think you need a lot of luck as well. I think clearly, I think there's some. I would say there's some really capable veterans out there, but I think you need to have people that recognise the skills that you bring. And I suppose I look in my team and I'm surrounded by deep technical experts, and I was very lucky that I think the person that hired me within the team, he recognised that I would think in a different way, and he recognised that I would do things in a slightly different way, and he said, well, actually that diversity is enormously valuable, and I think you have to land correctly, and I think that's the challenge with veterans. You have to sort of work out where you think your skills will be recognised and useful, but also with a business that has the patience to let you grow into it. And I think not all businesses, not all companies are able to do that. They want people that are performing from the outset, from that second. And I think I've been blessed that Sage has given me the time to grow and invest in me as well, to learn new things and learn processes in order to allow me to start adding value as quickly as I'm able to.
I'd like to tap into that a little more if we can. When somebody's coming out of the military and they're thinking about the kind of company that they want to work for, what are the things that they should be thinking about? What are the other aspects of making those decisions that people should be considering?
Yeah, I think it's multidimensional, right? I mean, I think it's I think what you need to you have to work out what excites you, and I think and someone said that to me when I was looking at my transition and said, well, what excites you? What gets you out of bed in the morning? What's the thing that you really like doing? What are those three big things? And I think that's the first part. I think the second part is you need to sort of look at your financial commitments as well and say, well, actually, how much do I what's the baseline I need to earn to sustain myself and my family? And then I think the third part is geography. And I think understanding where in the world or the country or region that you need to live because of family commitments, etc. And I think you have to then try and find I suppose a balance point or a tipping point amongst all of those three key variables, I think, as a start. And I think the last thing, and I always say this, is go where you feel you belong. And I think you get so when you're being interviewed for something, and you're talking to people, of course it's about selling yourself, but also you should be gauging what those individuals are like too, because there's a good chance you're going to be working very closely with those individuals that are interviewing you. And if you don't feel that your personality clicks or there's something not quite right there, and you don't think that you could work for an intensive period of time with that individual or those individuals, then perhaps that's not the right organization for you. And I think that's a really important part. So go where you feel you belong. I think that's vital. Yeah.
So how did you identify that with Sage? And how do they align with your values?
Well, I mean, the first bit with Sage, which I was really warm to, was the lady that sort of pulled me into the Pathways program. I say she couldn't have been any more sort of supportive and friendly, and it really sort of it stood out. I spent a long time sort of over my transition period. I'd done a lot of chatting to talent acquisition experts and different people, and I didn't get a feeling or a warm feeling from many of them. And she really sort of shone as someone that genuinely cared and was genuinely interested in me and sort of could really sympathise with my situation and sort of trying to understand and articulate myself as a civilian employee effectively. And she was fabulous, and I think that really helped me to, I suppose, make my peace with Sage. I was like, this is like, this feels like the right place for me. This feels comfortable. And then I think the second, and then as the interviews progressed, I sort of met different people, and each of the sort of the layers or the stratas of people that I met, again, I just had a better and better. I thought these people are clearly enormously capable, very friendly, very understanding, very interested in me, which was lovely, and sort of understand. They consistently gave a message that they understood that I was, at the time, something very different, and I needed to morph into something else, and that would take a bit of time. And I think I've been sort of really reassured by how the experience has actually gone. But I think that I suppose my spider senses in the early days were right. I think they back to my point, go where you feel you belong. I just felt that the people were my kind of people effectively, and they wanted to get things done. They wanted to do it right, but they wanted to be nice people in the process.
Does the high performance culture at Sage remind you of your military past in any way?
I've really been interested watching the sort of the high performance thing develop. And yeah, I was very lucky. I did quite a lot of work on sort of high performance stuff within the military as well, and looking at that and sort of what it was, defining it, and working with teams, sort of highly specialized teams to look at what high performance and how do you develop and how do you sustain it. So looking at it from a Sage perspective and through a corporate lens has been really, really interesting, and lots of like things are very similar, very, very similar. And I think for me, I feel high performance. It tends to manifest itself in a team environment in particular, as opposed to particularly with individuals. And what I mean by that is, if I'm having a bad day, then someone else in the team will effectively pick up the slack and sort of help the whole team sustain a very sort of high level. And if that person then has a bad day the next week, or they need help with something, I'll reach into their space and help them. So what you have is this effectively a team ecosystem where people are enabling each other at all times to maintain a very high level, even because no one, I think, as individuals can sustain high performance indefinitely. I just don't think that's possible from what I've seen. But I think when you have a culture like that, and I saw it a lot in the military, and I'm seeing it here in Sage as well, that people effectively help each other to sustain that high element. For me, I think that's enormously powerful, and it's great. And I think it's a great initiative that Sage are hunting. I think it's a great thing for us to hunt down, and it's really fascinating to watch.
Yeah, I can imagine when people have been in kind of more challenging work situations that don't have an empowering Sage-like cultural aspect to them. Even the idea of high performance might make them nervous and make them think that they've just got to be working 100 miles an hour all the time. But it's not really about that, right? I can definitely see how this idea of everyone being a part of a unit that leans on each other and helps each other mirrors an armed forces kind of experience.
And I agree, and I think it's also about, again, it comes back to the point we made earlier about humility, because I think it's being able to say, look, today it's just not working. I'm struggling a bit with it today, and I find that sometimes, and it'd be late in the afternoon on a Friday, I'm looking at some data problem, and my brain is fried. And what I find is I'll reach out to a couple of problem, will help you with this, and they fix it in seconds. I think, okay, because they've recognized that at that moment in time I just needed a bit of assistance, and vice versa. If they're struggling with something, then I can lean in and help them. I think that's really, really important. And I think and it's not all about sort of working as individuals. It's about sort of how do you help each other be successful as a team. And I think and I suppose I've taken that for granted, actually, based on a lot of my background and how you sort of all working for the common effort. And I think it's for me it's great to see it's great to see Sage hunting that outcome. I think and it's noticeable, actually, how the influence of the program, the high performance sort of program that's being rolled out, actually is coming into effect for people that I see around me, even by generating discussions like this. I think that's useful in itself.
Have your ambitions changed since you left the armed forces? And do you feel as though you are still as ambitious as you were?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think it's in my character to push to hard, and I think I'm the kind of person that when I see something that I feel I can add value to, I want to sort of go into it and see if I can help and how I can try and make things better. I think absolutely. I think it's important to consolidate. I think when you leave the services after a period of time that I have, and I think you can't just leap and leap and leap. I think you need to transition, settle, and then look at sort of where your ambition could take you. So I think it's an important part of consolidation. But I was very ambitious in the military, and I'm hopefully constructively ambitious in this world too.
And how is that being supported and encouraged within Sage?
I think, I'd say it's really interesting, because I find that what I do, I often ask when I go into meetings with different departments that I haven't worked with before. I ask them what they do, what they get up to, and everyone's really sort of forward-leaning with telling me their stories and what they do, and about how their organisation is developing, how it's changing shape or size, and I find that it's just be able to look across the whole of an organisation as large as Sage and sort of look at where the opportunities could be and where they're growing, and what challenges they're facing. So places there where I suppose different people can move around. And I really like the squiggly ideas concept, which I heard you say, which I think is a fabulous thing, which I hadn't heard of before. And I think it's a great thing that actually progressing isn't always about moving up. Actually, you can move sideways and down and around and back, and I think it's about what you feel is important to you. And I think that's I think it's a fabulous. And in some ways, I wish that we sort of integrated into the British Army that concept, because I think it's always about pushing to the next rank, the next rank, the next rank, when actually you can be just as fulfilled, if not more so, by taking a downward, sideways step to a certain thing that you're fascinated and you love and you're passionate about, as opposed to moving into a role potentially of a higher grade, which you're not quite as passionate about as well. So for me, I think that's really powerful, and I think it's a great thing that we encourage.
Oh, I'm glad you made the decision ultimately. It seems like you're really in a good place with it and are kind of surging ahead in your development whether that ends up taking you upwards or sideways or, whatever feels right.
Yeah, absolutely. And hopefully you picked up from the way I've been talking about it. I think it's, as I say, in the early days, it was some hard yards. I was absolutely sort of going into the office, not wondering what was going to happen that day. I look back and I think any transition is difficult, but I think coming out the other side of that transition, and I look at the skills I've got, the people I work with are fabulous. The team I'm in, the culture of the organisation that I'm part of, it's great. But also I wouldn't even call it a work-life balance. I don't believe in work-life balance. It's just life for me. And I think the lifestyle that I have now is vastly different to what it was, and really enjoyable. It allows me to, I'm not being sent away for 6 months on end, living in dusty and dry places, away from my family. It gives me that consistency for my family, which I'm hugely grateful for in that. So I think I'm absolutely delighted I've made the move, and really excited to see what happens next.
What's your message to other veterans who haven't found their place in the world since leaving the armed forces?
Yeah, it's tough. And I speak to a lot of my ex-soldiers. I keep in touch with them as much as I can, just to keep tabs on them, to make sure they're okay and support them. And I think I suppose it all comes back to what I said earlier about try and find where you feel you belong, and find something that excites you. And you're never going to find something like the military. You never find. I think finding an environment like that again it's near impossible. I think, to find anything like that. However, there are places out there which will make you equally as happy, but just in a different way, with different outcomes. And I think don't be too. Yeah, it is hard. It's really difficult, but accept it's going to be difficult, and accept it's going to be hard, and you're going to have good days and bad days. And and if we're honest with ourselves, we all had good days and bad days in the military as well. We did, absolutely. And I remember having a few particularly bad days and thinking, I will never forget this bad day, just to keep myself calibrated. And I think, and I'm sure they will all remember the same. So I think for me, it's look for something that excites you and look for where you feel you belong. And if you can find that, then I think you're probably 80% of the way there. And if they ever need any support, then you only have to reach out, and I'll do the best I can to help them.
That's a great message. In terms of support, I know that Sage has very well-established colleague success networks, which are both kind of safe spaces and voices of influence within the business. Is there anything like that to support former soldiers within the company?
Yeah, we do have a veterans network within Sage, so that has been set up. Actually, just over the last, a good colleague of mine who's a veteran, he sort of set that up, and we're part of that, which I think is great, actually. And I think I think what's really interesting is within the network, we've got people that have siblings or parents that are serving or have served. There's people that are, I suppose, like myself, who've served, people that have lost loved ones. It's quite a mixed bunch, which I think is really healthy, and I think it's a great forum, I think, for us to sort of look at the kind of challenges that that veterans have, but also to share stories, right? And I think often if you share a story, it can make you feel better. And I think, and listening to that, I think, and it's interesting because I've used some of the stories I've had there when I've been speaking to veterans about the challenges that they face going on. So I think it's great to have a network, and I think it'll only get more increasingly stronger as we go forward.
Just being part of the network must be incredibly enriching, kind of like a home away from home kind of feeling.
It is, and I really value. There's a couple of veterans I work with here up in Cobalt in Newcastle, and we meet each other fairly regularly, and I sort of always value the coffee and the jokes and the conversation when we get together. It's a nice little reminder of a different life, and something that shared bond that we have of service. Yeah, it's great.
Mark Hendry MBE, it has been such a privilege to talk to you. I'd like to thank you on behalf of Sage for your service, and I can see that this fresh start is going to be another enriching chapter in your life, and I wish you every success in your career with Sage. To everyone listening out there, thank you for tuning in. If you have friends or loved ones who are looking for a new start as they come out of service, send them a link to this podcast for some well-needed inspiration. And if you're ex-military yourself and want to find out more about life at Sage, Go to sage.com/careers and take a look at our Pathways program. Don't forget to check out other episodes in the Life at Sage podcast in the meantime on Apple Music, Spotify, and YouTube. We'll see you next time.